Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
As HR leaders, we're always focused on culture in the workplace, measuring employee engagement on a cultural level, improving morale, and the culture that our employer brand represents. Particularly in the tech sector, competition has become hardwired into so many company cultures, including hackathons, internal time to market goals, leaderboards, and awards for being the fastest, the best, and most innovative. But what does all this competition culture do to our workplace? That's what we're going to find out today on this episode of the Workology Podcast. Today I'm joined by Ariel Ezrachi. He's the Slaughter and May Professor of Competition Law at the University of Oxford and the Director of the University of Oxford Center for Competition Law and Policy. He has a new book out, and it is Competition Overdose: How Free Market Mythology Transformed Us from Citizen Kings to Market Servants. Ariel, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's get right to it. Why are we overdosing on competition in the workplace, do you think?
Well, the premise of the book and what we explore is the way in which competition was elevated in our modern culture into almost a religion. So there is a certain assumption that we're making, and you can see it at our daily life as individuals. You can see it when you look at sectors of the economy, and you can see it when you look at policy making and politics. And the assumption is that competition will always deliver the best results. So we have this notion that when we face any problem in our modern life, if we don't have another remedy, then just unleash competition, and the wonderful and mysterious market forces will optimize. We will get lower prices, better outcome, more efficiency, more innovation. And that's something that sometimes works. And in our book, we explore instances in which competition just does not deliver. And when you make reference to the workplace, what happens is something quite natural. We look at the way competition works outside the workplace, and then very often we assume, well, if this can deliver more when we look at markets, surely it can deliver more when we apply it inside the organization, inside the workplace. And this is another dimension that we explore in the book. When the assumption of greater competition actually collapses within the organization, and not only does not deliver, it also becomes toxic.
So competition is a religion. I think this is interesting. It's seen as a religion. And I do feel that way. It's when things go wrong, we just need to throw a game into it. We gamify it, or, let's us against them kind of situation. When we think of this from the perspective as workplace leaders, competition, I feel like, has such a cultural appeal for our organization and workforce. But what you're saying is that it doesn't always deliver the best results. Why are we doing it?
So it is really interesting because there is no single definition of what competition is. And because of that, you have this simplified narrative that competition is good. And indeed, it is often very good. So in the book, what we do is we create a spectrum of different types of competition. There is toxic competition. There is race to the bottom, zero-sum competition. There is positive-sum competition, and even something we refer to as noble competition. And what you need to understand is that it's not that we have a one-size-fits-all. So there are different types of competition. And if you wish to advance competition within your organization, what you need to have is this awareness that the process of rivalry will have different outcomes depending on the way that you design it. And I'll give you an example that we explore in the book, and it is what we refer to in Europe as Horsegate fiasco. And that was at some point where we discovered that our burgers, our meat, all the processed meat, included up to 100% horse meat rather than beef. And of course, there were many reasons for this in terms of quality, in terms of markets not operating. But one interesting power that led to that was how competition was used within certain organizations. So the story, if I simplify it, is fierce competition between supermarkets from which we expect to benefit as consumers. We expect to get lower prices and still, at the very least, the same quality. That competition is then translated to supermarkets, putting more pressure on beef providers. And then some beef providers decide that in order for them to meet their targets, they will introduce competition within their own organization. So you have beef providers that tell their different employees and different units, if you produce more at lower cost than the others, you will get a bonus. This is the target you have to reach. And what we see in that interesting story is that when there was excessive pressure on competition within those organizations, and when that competition was not monitored, in other words, there was just the assumption that more pressure will yield results, something had to give up, and that thing in our story was quality. And this is why eventually, because of that intense competitive pressure, because of the absence of any outside option but to start and cheat, some beef packers started to pack much cheaper horse meat and cheaper pig into the packs. And basically, they've done this because they couldn't see any other way of staying viable in a fiercely competitive environment. So this is just one example of how when you translate competition without understanding its limits, and you throw it into your organization, don't always expect miracles. You have to understand that sometimes there are limitations to that process, and that process will not necessarily benefit you as a company or society at large.
In your example, quality suffered.
In that specific example, I mean, we have many examples, just so you don't assume that this is just about food chains. Another example of quality that I think is quite striking is if you think about the Boeing 737 MAX and the horrible accidents where we have two airplanes that crashed. And even there, you can see what happened when competition distorted the incentives within the organization and led the organization to instruct the engineers not to mention certain modifications in order for the product as a whole to remain more competitive. And we explore quite a lot of instances where you can just see that the process of competition, while largely being extremely positive, if you put too much faith in it without any guardrails around it, it is likely to backfire.
This is all very interesting. I'm taking lots of notes, as I hope that the others that are listening in are doing the same. Your book focuses on competition broadly, and I feel like there's such a translation, and you're providing some great examples for the workplace and for businesses too. One area that I did want to talk about is this belief or this feeling that companies always must be innovative. So there must be all this innovation, and it is built into our employer brands and how we do our recruiting and hiring. And companies like this are companies that are very well known, like Google and Amazon. You have to be really aspirational and innovative to be able to work at a company like that. Can we have innovation without the element of competition, or do we have to have both in order to have one?
So let's start with the basics. What are the benefits of competition? Well, competition gives you generally lower prices, better quality, and more efficiency. And innovation is one type of efficiency. It's dynamic efficiency. So innovation and competition are interlinked in that respect, because innovation is one of the benefits of the competitive process. Now, when you have positive sum competition, you will have positive good innovation. When you have toxic competition, you might find yourself in a situation where the innovation that you deliver is toxic. So for instance, there could be a competition between companies on how to better exploit us as consumers. Think, for example, about competition of how to better harvest data from your mobile, how to better target you with behavioral or price discrimination, or a competition on how best to execute drip pricing or other methods that are meant to extract more value from your pocket to the pocket of the sellers. So competition can have two outcomes to it, one positive, one negative, and innovation as well, one which is positive and one which is negative. Now, to the other part of your question of whether innovation is always attached to competition, well, not necessarily so. Because if you aspire to a greater good, that can also stimulate innovation. If you look now at the COVID-19 pandemic and the crisis that we face, there are wonderful stories of collaboration among scientists, collaborations that are meant to help us with medicine or with a vaccine. So what we see is that innovation and competition goes hand in hand, but innovation can also be the result of a higher aspiration, some sort of a goal that the employees and all the stakeholders can feel that they want to be part of that, a certain organization purpose that in itself leads to innovation.
You mentioned Horseگate and the Boeing example. Do you have any more examples of how maybe competition in a workplace backfires in an organization?
Yes, we explored quite a few examples, but I'll give you one that I think is quite striking. If you appreciate that there are different types of competition that you can advance within your organization, what we show is that you can advance healthy competition within the organization, or you can advance zero-sum game competition that you would refer to it as warfare, where it is a certain assumption that your benefit has a cost to me, and when I benefit, it has to come at your cost. So some sort of an idea that we are operating in a closed environment. And think for a second about Enron, and I'm sure you and the listener are familiar with the whole Enron saga and the Enron story. But the way Enron used competition within the organization was to create some sort of employee evaluation where you were competing against the other employees. And if you were performing highly in relative sense, you were safe. But the bottom 15% was always pushed out. Now, it is really important for us because if you take it and you assume that competition brings the best out of us, then you would have assumed that this would bring us more efficiency and better outcomes for the company. And yet, in hindsight, we are aware that this was far from the case. Although some reports rated Enron as a place that employees are really happy to work in, later on it was revealed that this was all being done by the company itself, that basically falsified all the submissions to all those general questionnaires that we have of the best place to live. And what we can also see is that once you created a culture of winners and losers, then employees had absolutely no respect to their peers. What employees did is try everything in order to undermine their peers. And that has consequences to the company. So that competition backfired. It backfired because employees sabotaged other employees. They had to lie in order to improve their own position within the organization. And what you have is something that we refer to in economics as a market for lemons. If some people cheat within my organization and are being rewarded for it, then I have no incentive to behave ethically because I will not be rewarded for that. If the company assumes that there is a certain level of dishonesty, then you have to immediately align your personal strategy with that organizational strategy. And this is what eventually led to a catastrophe, a company that has no ethical values when it comes to its position within the wider market, but also a company in which the internal values did not serve the purpose of the company.
Interesting. I feel like I'm going back to my economics classes in college because I do remember market for lemons is one of those things, but I hadn't thought so much about the culture. And I certainly didn't know that Enron was falsifying like best places to work awards. Makes sense given everything else that they did. They have to create an appearance of being a great company and a great place to work, but also on the same other side of things meet expectations and kind of that whatever you have to do at all costs attitude in order to win and to meet those market expectations.
Well, it's an interesting anecdote. In I think it was 2000, they were number 22 on Fortune magazine chart of best 100 best companies to work for in America. And later on, it appeared that it was the human resources executives that filled out the surveys. But there you go.
Wow. I wonder how often that's done. That's a whole nother podcast episode, though. Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you are listening to the Workology podcast, sponsored by Workology. Today, we're talking about toxic versus healthy competition in the workplace with Ariel Ezrachi. Are you studying for your HRCI or SHRM exams? Join our free HR certification study group on Facebook. Search for HR Certification Study Group or go to hrcertificationstudygroup.com. Ace your HR exams with the HR Certification Study Group. Well, what are we missing in perception and execution of this competitive model? You gave us some examples of some companies who obviously have made some mistakes and are using competition poorly in their organizations. But what are some examples maybe of companies that are doing it right, and what are they doing that maybe the Enron guys and the other examples aren't?
Okay, so if we think about the building blocks and what we discussed so far, the narrative is really convincing. Competition delivers more, and indeed, often it does. But there are different types of competition. In other words, do not make an assumption of some sort of a linear link, more pressure, better results. An assumption of rationality, which we often make in economics, that we are rational agents that always react in the way that will yield better outcomes. Now, if you look at behavioral studies and experiments, you see that many of the assumptions that we make when it comes to markets do not materialize when we look at individuals. So we assume in markets that if you behave selfishly and promote your own interest, we will benefit as a society because of the invisible hand of competition and so forth. But if you translate that into organizations, what you see is that we are not those rational competitive machines. In fact, there is a term that refers to us as conditional cooperators. We actually favor cooperation as long as we believe that others will cooperate as well. And what we do is, if we feel that people are free riding on our efforts, if the environment that was created for us doesn't fit our natural tendency, then we correct, and then we try to punish them, and we stop the cooperation attitude that we have. And there are many games and many scenarios where you try to get a sense of what drives employees. What is it that really convince them whether to cooperate, whether to collaborate or compete? And there are various experiments, but maybe if I'll just mention two things that would possibly give us some context. So when Harvard Business Review surveyed around 500 executives about what is it that drives their successful companies, all of them made reference to the idea that you have to move beyond the basic concept of profit. If what you sell to your employees is the idea of competition and profit, you will not get as much as if what you are putting at the front is some sort of aspiration, some sort of greater goal, something that the company and the employees aspire to. And the same in another survey by Deloitte that also looked at a larger number of employees. People want to have a sense of belonging, people want to feel engaged, and people want to have a stake at the company's future. The last thing people want is some sort of toxic competition where they are pitted against each other. Because when this is what you create, in a way, there isn't enough space for the employees to serve those greater goals because suddenly they become survivors. What they need is to find means to protect the very basic. They go down in the pyramids of needs and suddenly they have to worry about other things. So the way to get the most out of your employees and the way successful companies do that is to have a greater goal, have some sort of an aspiration, and have a concept of competition, but competition which includes collaboration, competition towards a greater goal, which is what we refer to as noble competition or positive sum competition, a competition in which at the end we benefit as a group while you benefit as an individual. And you can distinguish that competition from toxic competition where your benefit is actually my loss.
What are your thoughts on maybe an organization, maybe it doesn't have, it's teetering on toxic or isn't an organization like a best places to work organization, a real kind of best places to work organization? But what about individual contributors or managers? Do they have greater influence on creating their own maybe noble competition kind of culture within their teams? Or is it only starting at the top of the organization that we see success for maybe individuals or groups?
Though we all have a role to play in creating the right culture. Um, think of us as parents. You're running your own little ecosystem as a family. Let's assume you have 2 kids. You want them both to succeed. What kind of competition do you create between them? Do you want a competition when one of them wins, the other feels like a loser, and the other is regarded as a failure and has to pay a certain cost for the loss? Or do you view competition within your little unit as a strive for a greater good? And what you want is for both of your kids to really make an effort. You want both of them to win, but as part of the process, you design it in a way that they understand the competitive process as a process where there is a spirit of competition, but we do it together as a team. There is a spirit of competition, but even when I win, I care about you understanding how you can improve. And when I lose, it's not a loss that really costs me within the organization. It's a loss that is an opportunity to learn. And this is how most of us, when we treat our families, we try to create this environment because we think that such a positive environment will bring the best out of our kids. Now, translate that to an organization. If you manage 3 people, 5 people, or 100 people, this is something that you want to create. The similar spirit where what you aspire to is a positive sum competition. So you can ask yourself 2 very basic questions. Is the type of culture that you created for your little group that works for you is one that competition serves the team collectively rather than serve individuals before it serves the team? What exactly is it that you're creating? And maybe linked to that is when people compete in your group, do they have to sacrifice other values that you consider important as the leader of that group or the manager? There are many values, and it's not necessarily that you want them to consider all of them, but are they aware of other values that you would like to promote alongside competition? And are they able, and one of them, of course, will be integrity, and are they able to compete without sacrificing those values? And if you think about these 2 elements, you can design a competitive dynamic that is positive. But most importantly, as someone that manages a group, competition will serve you rather than you serving competition.
I love this so much because I think sometimes it's really hard to think of your employees as family, but you're right, they are an ecosystem and you're the leader of that ecosystem. So you are responsible, even if it's 3 people, that on your team for creating an environment that fosters competition and encourages and lifts employees up, just like you would within your family. And I think a lot of us can appreciate that right now, because we are spending a lot of time with our family right now, and we're all together in a small space. It can still work. It just takes a lot of concerted effort and a lot of caring and love for those people within your family unit. I love it. Ariel, this has been a really great conversation, and I appreciate your time. Where can people go to learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
So first we have the book that we just referred to, Competition Overdose, that just came out. And in the book, we explain the spectrum of different types of competition. We explain when competition backfires, and also how you can address that at the policy level of the state or corporation, at the industrial level, but also as individuals, because there is the power of dissent, the power of you as individual changing the way you treat competition is something remarkable. I think the listeners can find a lot of information in that book. In addition, if you look at the University of Oxford website, there are links to other areas that we explore. In our work on competition now, we have a research group that looks at equality and competition, the links between them. We've done a lot of work on the digital environment, virtual competition, algorithmic pricing, buyer power, mergers. So we're working on a lot of aspects of competition policy and trying to understand, I mean, a little bit forward-looking, because what we try to do is to adjust our policies to a very rapidly evolving market and try to see to what extent we need to change our base assumptions. And in our discussion, it's also changing the analytical framework and sometimes changing the laws.
Well, we will link to your book in the transcript of the podcast, and then we'll also link to other resources that you've mentioned as well. I thank you so much, Ariel, Ezrachi, and talking to us about competition. I think this has real application in the workplace, and it's important for us to learn how the history and theory and how competition is being applied in other areas of our work and life and politics, and to think about how we might be able to leverage and learn from these lessons in our own workplace environment. So thank you so much, Ariel, for your time today.
My pleasure.
When it comes to our workplace culture, we believe we're doing all the right things to make our employees happy and productive. But the idea of removing competition from our cultural models turns this on its head a bit. Should we do it? What do you think? We can't uncover this by sending employee surveys, or even employees, they don't know that competition can be toxic. Certainly our managers aren't always aware, even if they see examples of it everywhere throughout large, innovative companies. And workplace leaders can't see the forest through the trees. I appreciate Ariel for joining us today, giving us a fresh perspective on creating a purpose-driven workplace that has noble competition at the forefront and center of everything it is doing. Thank you for joining the Workology podcast, sponsored by Workology. This podcast is for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. This is Jessica Miller Merrill. Until next time, visit workology.com to listen to all our previous Workology podcast episodes.